Would you consider yourself a morning person?
I think at this time of year, yes, because I think it's kind of you often find that the weather is the sweetest at the first half an hour of the day, particularly in England, where it's just going to rain probably from 10 o'clock. I mean, around about now onwards. So yeah, I guess I am.
There's a weird kind of feeling when it feels like you're up before everyone else and you're kind of up early and raring to go, and it's a good motivator.
It's my favorite, and it's my favorite on tour. Any kind of touring I'm doing, I always want to get up early and walk in whatever city I'm in and find like a really good coffee. And particularly if there's not many people about, or you're just watching people kind of shuffling to work or whatever. I think there's something so pure about that moment in the morning to yourself.
It feels like you're almost a fly on the wall as well, and you shouldn't be there. You're kind of just spying on all these people.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a ghost, just observing. Yeah, without people knowing that you're there. I mean, that's kind of creepy. like a voyeur of kind of normality. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels weird looking back to that as well now when everything has been. I mean, that's kind of taken away at the moment. If you were to go into a city today, I imagine you wouldn't see as many people kind of going about their business.
Yeah, I feel sort of disappointed that I never did that thing. I was living in London in the major lockdown, and I didn't jump on the tube and go and see what it was like in central London. And I feel like slightly disappointed that I didn't do that. But at the same time, I didn't want to do that in the knowledge that maybe lots of other people would do that. And I felt like I really did feel a sense of, and a lot of people did, of kind of collective responsibility to sort of take it very seriously and stay at home. But I do feel disappointed that I didn't get to witness the ghost town.
I can imagine it would have been quite bizarre. I remember where I was up in Aberdeenshire for lockdown out in the middle of nowhere pretty much. And just away from me, maybe about a half hour's walk, there was a motorway. And I remember walking past it every day and it just being absolutely dead when it would have usually been, heaving in the middle of the day. Just bizarre.
Yeah, it's there was something so extraordinary about that. And I lived on a main road in North London, and it's like a main bus route. And the first time I saw a bus with no one on it, it was just so eerie and very strange. Yeah.
Yeah, quite a kind of striking piece of imagery, I imagine. Does that kind of stick out to you when you think back to the lockdown, that image of it going past?
Actually, yeah, that image and an image which is slightly more sad. There was a girl who lived across the road from me who had a baby, and her mum coming to visit, but they didn't have a garden. They're in a flat like me, so they were sitting on this kind of patch of grass, and her mum coming to visit her with her child for the first time, and sitting 2 meters away and throwing like a pizza box to her for lunch. And there was just something about it that was so like unbelievably weird and sad. Watching this kind of what should be such a kind of joyful and free moment being interrupted.
Yeah, just this kind of degree of separation there, so plain to see.
Yeah, and just the whole like lockdown affected people differently depending on what your living circumstances were. Like if you were in a flat and you didn't have a garden, you were having a very different time to people with their gardens and the glorious weather and the countryside, whatever. So lots of people were saying it was a very leveling or universal experience, but I don't think that it was really. I think if anything, what we're feeling now is a lot of tensions that have come out as a result of the kind of inequalities that have become very clear at this point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, it felt like it highlighted so many of the issues and kind of just brought them straight to the surface. It's like picking up a rock, and when you see all the bugs underneath it, it kind of just highlighted everything that was there that
Yeah.
everyone kind of knew but hadn't been looking at.
Yeah. I've seen some pretty good bugs recently. Yesterday I saw the most handsome woodlouse I've ever seen in my life. Oh my god.
What's a day in the life like for you at the moment then?
Well, currently, like at the moment, I've been building this studio. So with my dad. My dad's he's a joiner, he's a chippy. So he's like a 9 to 5. He's like, right, I get here at 9, and we work. We take a full lunch break, and then we work till 5:30, 6 o'clock. And so at the moment, it's been so different to what my days are normally like. But yeah, we've just spent the last 6 weeks doing that. We just finished. So I'm actually just sort of, and we've moved house, and I'm actually living in this bungalow that my grandma used to live here. Then she passed away, and then my dad's mum and dad moved in here, and my granddad died here. And then in lockdown, my sister had her baby in the front room of this house. So I'm living in this house that's kind of held such a lot of kind of story recently, and then building this studio. I'm just sort of trying to like work out what my days are going to look like or feel like here. Really, it's all quite new.
Have you ever, I know you were speaking there about how your dad's very much in, kind of 9 till 5. Is that something that's ever worked for you for writing, or has it always just been a bit, much more of a fluid thing?
To be honest, I think that it depends. I think that putting parameters on your day is really important. So the EP I just released, Whoosh, I wrote most of that in like 5 days, which I did in a studio in London, and it was the restrictions were kind of financial and time based, so I could afford 5 days in a writing room, and I just had to get as much done as possible. But they only let me have the writing room 11 till 5 each day, and I got so much done because I knew what my parameters were and they were really clear. So at times like this, where lots of artists maybe have spent a lot of time writing already, maybe have already finished a record, not knowing when we might go on the road again, it's difficult to kind of have any hand boulders or whatever. Like if you're climbing a wall, it just feels like endless. So I do think that setting yourself boundaries, even if it's just like, I'm going to write from 8 in the morning till lunchtime, and then in the afternoons I'm going to watch documentaries or like what or whatever. But I don't think just going to the studio every day is how I work personally.
Yeah, it's almost like being polarized by choice in a weird kind of way.
I think having too much time is not good for you. Famously and biblically, idle thumbs and all that. So yeah, trying to find some structure, particularly at the moment, is I think is good. Yeah, it's good for me.
When were you in that studio? When did you go in for those 5 days?
In December. So it'd been really busy. I think I was doing work with Bombay. I just had a lot of time, and I knew I just put out Pity Party, and I knew that I was going on the road again in January really quickly. So I was like, if I want to be kind of it's a bit business speaky, but like ahead of myself, I should try and write an EP to have out, this year. So it was December, yeah.
That's really fascinating when it came, because if you think about like Whoosh, the opening track with this kind of joyful upbeat opening and this warm palette, it very much feels like you can get that sense of it's looking forward and it's kind of looking at the horizons and what's coming up.
Yeah. I remember so clearly at that time feeling, I suppose I like the term empowered, but I also felt very kind of whole. It's a very difficult thing to achieve, that sense of being like, okay, my plates are all spinning and I'm like smashing this. And I feel good, and so that I did actually write that tune at that time. So it was quite weird to put it out at a time where it's like, oh, I like literally someone just came along and smashed all my plates, but that's cool because they smashed everyone else's, so I'm not going to complain.
The closing track is more maybe fitting for where we're at now. It feels like a song that has that kind of weird sense of finality and a message that could be quite easily applied to our times and quite applicable.
Is Hope or Something Like It the last track?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. I wrote that one in quarantine. I wrote that in the lockdown.
Ah, right.
Yeah, and so we put it on. I think that I felt compelled to put something out right away because it was there. I was like, right, I've written this thing. Let's put it on the EP as part of things because I wanted to connect. Because I wasn't on the road, I wanted to connect with people somehow, and that was my offering.
I guess that kind of ties into, that idea of connecting people, the same thing with the hot mill you set up and that idea of people getting in touch and kind of having that connection.
Absolutely. I mean, I checked that this morning. Like, I love that. I got sent so many fascinating stories of little snapshots of their lives at that point. People in airports trying to get home, people who were separated from partners and loved ones, and it was a real privilege. I mean, I hate it when people say that, but it was that people wanted to sort of write to me and sort of. I tried to write back to everyone. I mean, hopefully I didn't miss anyone. It was brilliant. I'm really glad I did it because I think people are struggling. I think it's a really hard time, and you just want to do what you can to try and make someone feel just that little bit more like they exist.
I guess when you're isolated, and like a lot of people were, you lose that sense of communication, that sense of connection with someone else. So just to have that actual physical kind of thing of writing out a full email, it's different as well to just typing a message or a text or whatever. It's almost like letter writing in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a massive advocate for keeping a journal because it's a sort of way of scanning yourself and being like, oh, okay, I'm not okay, or actually I had a good day, or perhaps I'm doing all right, or maybe that was an opportunity I missed today, or like it's checking in. So writing a long letter or an email, it performs sort of two services: a service to yourself and a service to the person that you're trying to communicate with. I mean, this all sounds very therapy, doesn't it? I just think my heart goes out to everyone, so, universally, who's kind of dealing with this. It's really hard.
What emotion was most prevalent, do you think, from all the emails?
Probably, I mean, that's a really good question. Now just kind of going back in my head. I think it was one of fear, really. If we go into, people didn't know what was going to happen with their jobs, what was going to happen with their loved ones, what was going to. And yeah, I think that fear as an emotion is something that I kind of know and understand very well. And I think that fear is at the root of a lot of our behavior, whether it's fear or overcoming fear or succumbing to fear. And I know at the moment there's a lot of kind of conversations about being brave and not giving into fear, this kind of Trumpian, like, you don't need to be afraid kind of thing. But I think you have to think of fear as a protective, useful tool. You acknowledge it and you decide how much of your kind of ancestral self is like, God, I spent so much time with my dad. My dad's a real hippie, like he's such a hippie. This is kind of why this conversation's gone a bit this way, but fear doesn't have to be something that you simply cast aside or let it take over you. You can find a way of using fear to help you work out what it is and that you need to do.
Yeah, I think especially when you think about stuff like, fear of existential stuff, if you try and fight that, you're not really going to get anywhere. You kind of need to accept it and make it a part of you to have any hope of kind of getting past it, or at least coming to terms with it.
Yeah, acceptance is definitely the word, and I think that accepting what's happening now is the only way that you're going to kind of keep yourself, okay, I suppose.
It felt like when everything was happening at the start that it was probably the most afraid I think I can remember, like a collective sense of fear kind of overcoming the whole country. I know people kind of spoke about it, compared it to war times, and almost with that kind of overwhelming fear, I guess that was the thing that kind of connected us a little bit and united people.
It felt like a real common enemy where, we're dealing at the moment with conceptual or ideological enemies rather than something that we, like an alien or, something separate to the planet somehow that unites the planet to say we can all turn and look at this thing and say that is our enemy. It didn't last very long, but for a moment I felt that was what happened. Everyone was saying, we weren't being told that each other were the enemy, although obviously that's kind of what it's got to now. But there was a lot of kind of talk about how much good it brought out in people, and yeah.
It's depressing it hasn't stuck around a little bit more. Did you say before you keep a journal as well, like a diary?
Yeah, well, I've journaled on and off since I was about 10, I think.
Do you look back at them quite a lot, or when do you?
Yeah, I did recently because I moved, like I said, from London back to my hometown. So this is where my family are, and I had a big trunk of these old journals that my mum was desperate for me to finally take away from their house. But honestly, I can't stand reading them, mostly because they're so unreliable. Like when I'm 13, 14, it's particularly bad because I'm reading this account of an event, and as an adult, I'm looking back and going, I remember that, and that's not how it happened, and that's not what you felt. And it's interesting because I think that when you're journaling in that kind of personal way, that kind of teen movie way, you are aware that maybe someone will read it. Whereas now I write a journal that's more just what happened, what happened today. Like it's not kind of loaded with my feelings on things or whatever. It's just like today was this, today was that, which I learned from my friend Seren, actually, who's the drummer in Bombay Bicycle Club, because he said that that's how he journals, and I was like, that sounds pretty good to me. So it's just a record of events, essentially.
What's it like when, so say you're reading them and you read a page that you remember pretty well? How does that compare to reading something that you have absolutely no recollection of?
Oh God, you know what? The no recollection thing is just as curious. I think memory is quite a fascinating kind of fallible human tool, or anyway, because so often we don't remember things the same way, or we remember something because someone told us it some particular way. It's incredibly changeable and unreliable. I don't know, because then if I read it and I say I don't remember that event, but my imagination has now conjured that event, is the event my imagination conjuring, an honest reflection of the time? I mean, absolutely not. I find that reading back on diaries, it just kind of proves the way you survey your life is not necessarily true.
I guess with time, your like emotions and how you feel about a certain situation end up kind of contorting the memory a wee bit and kind of shifting it and molding it maybe a wee bit more how you wanted it to have gone.
Of course, and I think that there's been some really interesting kind of examples of this when sort of kind of your society changes. So maybe I remember listening, and I can't remember her name, but a lady who married her art school teacher and he sort of like hit on her when she was 16, and they ended up getting married, and she wrote a book about it back in the day. And they wrote a kind of revised book about it more recently after Me Too, being like, whoa, I didn't realize that that was properly kind of not okay. But she still loved him, and it's a really lovely story, and they had a brilliant relationship. But the times changed and altered the way she remembered that event
Yeah, that's fascinating. Almost like the context it was placed in a wider sense shifted it.
massively. And I think that, that's it's quite interesting. I think that's quite an interesting thing that's going on with lots of kind of online. I mean, I'm not, throwing shade on it, but kind of Twitter juries and stuff where you might take an event that happened a long time ago and, kind of drag it into 2020 sphere. And of course, it's not going to be deemed acceptable. So it's quite difficult. I just love that story. If I'll email you actually the name of that lady, because she did a podcast episode that I listened to.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out. It's such a weird thing taking something completely out of context and dropping it into the kind of modern era. Is that the same with like music? How do you feel like the kind of wider context and the environment that you release music into impacts the way it's like received and interpreted by people?
It can be more important than the song sometimes. I think that I've known examples of songs that have come out and made no impact and then been out for several years, and then a kind of an event will occur and will make that song completely sing in that moment. It will ring that bell, and suddenly, they have kind of transformed careers. But similarly, I've heard of people who have put out songs with particular lyrics, and then a certain event will happen and everyone will say it's no longer appropriate. For example, songs about play. This is going to sound crass. It's not supposed to. Songs about planes around 9/11. It was like if you were talking about, flight, it was probably your track wasn't going to get played on the radio. I think that the wider environment is going to massively dictate how well your music resonates with people. Yeah, you can't control it really. You just have to hope that each of your moments finds a moment.
You wonder how the events that are kind of occurring all over the world at the moment, whether that be the pandemic or a lot of the other movements that are currently going on, are going to go forth and kind of impact it in a similar way.
Yeah, I think that people have been studying our kind of habits and behaviors during this time. And I think in terms of music, people have been looking to feel better. So it's like, classics. People have been listening to classics and feel good music. And I can understand that. I mean, I personally have just been listening to a lot of Radiohead because I feel like I sat in my kitchen last night and I was like under the speaker and it was just, like perfect. It was perfect, perfectly rhythmic and perfectly sad and perfectly understood. And I was like, oh yeah, it changed my mood. I was like, this is perfect. I'm very lucky to be alive.
What's your go-to Radiohead album? What's the one you kind of gravitate toward the most?
This is controversial, so I'm gonna just throw it out there and hope for the best, but I'm a massive fan of In Rainbows. I know.
I don't think that's controversial. I'd go the same.
I really okay, because I mean, yeah, I've got friends who are just like, nah, that's not how you do Radiohead, Liz. And I'm like, well, what can I say?
I feel like most people, when I discovered Radiohead, everything had kind of been out, if you know what I mean. Like the discography was, I feel like if you live through it, you maybe have a slightly different perception of it. But most people I know, I feel like go for In Rainbows as well. I feel like if you've absorbed the discography once, it's kind of mostly whole.
Yeah, I think I'm exactly the same as you. I sort of worked backwards from In Rainbows. So yes, yeah, my kind of like moment of sort of discovering Radiohead was probably a lot maybe later than some people's.
How old were you when you discovered them?
I think I was 19, and so as someone who was kind of relatively into music, to be 19 and sort of feel radio. I mean, when I say discover, I mean like I felt them. I think I saw them do 15 Step on Jules Holland, and I was like, oh my god, wow! Because I obviously knew who Radiohead were, but they didn't resonate with me. They sort of always I sort of associated them in my mind with like sunglasses wearing uncles with a tape player in their car, and I was like, I was only into punk. I was like only into So when I saw that performance, I think that I felt that I was being allowed to find them by myself rather than being, the certain bands where people are always trying to kind of
push them on you a wee bit.
Yeah. And then you just have to discover it by yourself. Similarly, I had the same thing with Joni Mitchell, where I had to find her by myself.
I know you were saying at that time when you kind of discovered them, you were into kind of mostly punky stuff. At what point have your taste kind of evolved most, like most rapidly? At what period in your life have your taste gone through quite a transformation?
I think probably now. I think that in my mid-20s, like when I was about 25, because when you're younger, I feel like your taste, it's about identity and you're identifying to people who you are. And also I grew up in a, this small town. It was very, very white and very, very male. So I was in a band, but I was the only girl I knew who was in a band. I didn't know of any bands I listened to that had any women members. So I listened to basically no female vocalists with the exception of Patti Smith until I was about, I'm not even kidding, until I was about 20. And then I would meet people, and particularly my partner, she had a huge effect on showing me, the fact that I was, as a teenager, I didn't listen to Hold is quite interesting, because I don't think that anyone was kind of showing me that kind of route. I was just following the dudes and I loved it. There was no, but it's just quite interesting. So I think once you can kind of do away with that, using your taste as an armor and allowing yourself, or feeling strong enough to allow it to be vulnerable, it's such a wicked thing to discover. I mean, I try and listen to as much music as possible. I think it's the best. I think it's the best thing human beings do. I mean, with the exception of painting or whatever art. Yeah. So I say that I think that my taste is getting better and better as I get older.
The last record kind of feels like a product of that as well, because lyrically it kind of tackles a lot of what happened in your mid-20s, and so it kind of makes sense that the sound of it as well is kind of a product of that, and kind of an amalgamation of all those influences coming together in that period of kind of rapidly changing tastes and evolution.
Yeah, definitely. And I think particularly kind of I was listening to, finally listening to bands with mostly American, but like, punk or guitar music that was female led. And that was, that hadn't been introduced into my listening really at all. So I think that has a massive effect in what you feel like you can do and what boundaries you can push.
Yeah, for sure. With that last record, tackling so much of that time period as well in your 20s, how did your 20s compare to what you expected them to be?
Well, I think that I had a very tumultuous introduction into the music industry. I was signed at 19. I was at art school. I left art school. I dropped out. I moved to London. I signed with a major label. I had a, very kind of proactive, kind of businessy management. Looking back again at my journals, I was like going for meetings all the time at like bloody like accountants' offices. I was like, oh, it was so sort of not creative. And that kind of quickly dissolved with various kind of complications. And I got involved in a really long lawsuit for most of the advance that I'd, had given to me, whatever, however it works. So I think that I had high ambitions, like, well, I'd say high ambitions. I think basically I was like, I'm going to be a pop star. But then I sort of got into that world and saw it for what it was. And I'm really glad that that didn't happen. So then you kind of constantly reevaluating where you fit, what's right for you, where's going to kind of bring out your fullest potential. So I think that my 20s were a struggle in lots of ways. But then I had amazing opportunities. The touring I did with Bombay changed my worldview. It changed, I'd never used chopsticks before I toured with Bombay. So I was like, it completely kind of expanded what I thought was possible from music again, after sort of having my kind of ambitions dashed a little bit. So I think I'm in the right place. I mean, how much more successful can something be than thinking? Because I turned 30 a couple of months ago, and I did a lot of that analysis. I think I'm in the right place. I feel like I can still get better and do better, and that's pretty good. That's pretty cool.
You can kind of use them to propel you, that idea of wanting to be better and still having that kind of fire in your belly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it must be like for youngsters who kind of have toured the world 3 times and have made loads of money by the time they're 21. What's next? I suppose it must be kind of a big question. You're always going to be asking yourself that question.
At what point, you were speaking there as well about how you kind of saw the industry for what it was a wee bit. At what point did the allure and the kind of magic of it start to slide a wee bit and slip? It's quite a deceiving industry.
I think that the industry, I always say that I never have anything against major record labels. I think they do a fantastic job with what they're doing. It just wasn't right for me. And it was the first time in my life where I was around people who were dealing in money, big money. I didn't understand it. I didn't speak the language. I think that in that respect, I was incredibly naive and quite vulnerable, really. And you've got, only men around you all the time. I felt that my boundaries were being pushed in terms of how I wanted to look, like how I felt comfortable, things like putting money on whether or not they could get me in heels at a photo shoot. This kind of, it's not nice. Like, it's kind of small, but it's not nice. And these little things start to ring your panic bell inside. You're like, right, this is not good. But I'm really glad that I did it, because I think that I knew it wasn't the right way. I knew it wasn't the right people. Certainly got me somewhere, and it certainly it got me started in whatever, with whatever resilience I had to build after that. I'm sort of proud of myself, I guess.
Yeah, you become stronger as a result of these experiences.
Well, you either do or you don't, you know. It took a long time for me to think that I have actually got stronger. I think that when it's something that you love, and it's something that you feel like you're being told that you have one chance at, or that, it's around the time where shows like the X Factor and stuff were kind of, they were the kings of the industry. So it was all about pulling you out of your shitty little normal life. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear.
No,
And
go
making
for it.
you a star. Yeah, and what a horrible, pernicious kind of idea to have people kind of desire. And I think, yeah, so you sort of have your hairstylist, like combing your hair, saying you get one chance at this, sweetie, and all this stuff, and you're like panicking all the time, puts you into a state of stress. It makes you make decisions that you wouldn't normally. And yeah, I don't know. It's curious. I think that can really make you quite tired by the end of the whole proceeding. So you have to build yourself up sort of brick by brick, which I think that I did. So I'm sort of like a rustic cabin now myself.
I mean, you must learn a lot about yourself from having to do that though as well. Having to kind of rebuild and
Yeah, definitely. I think that you, throughout your life, will be amazed at what you can discover about yourself at any point, and I don't think that ever stops. You can hide things away completely and not know that they're there, and then suddenly you're like, of course, like that makes so much sense. And I think that's amazing. It amazes me the kind of depths that we have inside of ourselves. I do feel like I've developed a resilience and an amazing kind of network of people really now. I've got, great friends, great management, great people working around me, which has taken a while, but which is kind of makes the big difference.
what was like the most important realization you had during that period?
I think that I thought a lot about instinct. I thought, wow, your instinct is so good. And I sort of spent so many years batting my instinct away. I spent another year or so worrying that I'd lost my ability to detect my instincts completely. I sort of lost the sense of being able to make decisions. Like I didn't have any compass inside of me. I felt that I'd broken it because I'd overridden it so many times. But it comes back, and I think that I've retrained myself to kind of understand what my instinct is and where it's trying to take me and what it's trying to keep me safe from.
Is that the same when you're making decisions from like a creative point of view and musically when you're working on songs? Is that the same thing that's guiding you?
Yes, definitely. And I think that's what it's led to ultimately is, I think when I was younger, and I think lots of younger artists do this, not all, but lots, I felt like there was part of my brain, if I'm being honest, part of my brain was always thinking about how the work was going to be received when I was making it, or who I was trying to kind of impress. Whereas now, I genuinely feel like I let go, and I do find a flow with my work when I'm very happy, where I don't think about where the song's gonna end, where it's gonna go next, when it's going to be released, who's going to release it. I just enjoy the process of making instinctively so much. Like it's the biggest pleasure.
Is that what's kind of enabled you to be so honest in your songwriting now as well? That kind of letting go in that release and just being completely free and liberated?
I mean, I say this, but I always say that I don't get embarrassed, or I try not to get embarrassed. I think that embarrassment is kind of tied into shame and tied into nasty ideas. And I think, I feel like I can be strong enough to stand up and say, like, this is my flaw, or this is a horrible mistake I made, and appreciate that not only is it cathartic for me, that it is connecting with others who might feel that they can't say that they are weak, or that they are sad, or that they fucked up. I mean, that sounds a bit bloody pious, but like in a small way, I feel like that's something that I can do.
Embarrassment's such a strange kind of emotion. Like you were saying there, where it kind of comes from, it's so bizarre. Like you do kind of wonder if it's something we're born with, or if it's very much something that's kind of projected onto us and instilled in us as we kind of grow up.
Good, yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, obviously there's the kind of Adam and Eve. So I don't know, I don't know my Bible well enough, but she eats the apple, right, which then makes them aware of their nakedness, and so then they start to cover themselves with. That's the first idea of modesty, because they're embarrassed of their parts, of their kind of their sex or whatever.
I guess it's kind of a metaphor for loss of innocence as well, isn't it?
Yeah, but I feel like society, I would definitely consider myself to be a person that has always felt suspicious of societal norms. I'm not your normal girl. I'm not your normal townie. I've never felt like I have any desire whatsoever to uphold the status quo. So I feel like that's why I'm like, I will not be embarrassed, because that's me bowing down to what you expect of my behavior. I conduct myself with kindness, with generosity, with listening, with vulnerability, but I won't pretend to uphold rules that are holding people back. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it sounds like you can be completely liberated as a result of that, and kind of completely free to do what you want with your music as a result of. I guess it can be fascinating as well to kind of upend people's expectations when it comes to your kind of creativity and your music as well.
Yeah, maybe, but I think it's a hard thing to do. I think when you were building up a fan base, when you were indie artists, you there's still that sense, I think, a little bit of like not wanting to like lose them and being like, oh, come back, please. I think you have to be really brave. But I also think that I'm definitely at the point now where I go, yeah, I feel brave. I feel brave. I feel like, okay, I'd like to take this curious detour and see what happens. And it doesn't matter, I think that the thing is that people can get very over concerned about the next EP or the next record. And actually I'm like, well, I hopefully will make 10 or 15 albums in my life. And I'm making my third. So I'm like, I need to break boundaries to keep being able to do this. I can't just keep sitting thinking, well, is anyone going to like this? I don't think that's how you make an omelette.
Do you think creating music and initially does it make you care more or less about what other people think?
I think everyone would like, I'd love to be able to sit here and say, I don't care what people think, but I really care. I care that I'm having an impact, however small, on people's time on the planet. So I think that I do care, but it doesn't have to be a yes or no answer. I kind of care. I'm interested in what people sort of think of the work, or, I feel like quite often we're being asked to say, yes, I like that, or no, I don't like that, rather than kind of studying it. I don't know, not studying it, but I want people to engage whether they like it or not. My least favorite question format in the world is, what's your favorite ... Because I'm like, what's my favorite? Like, I don't know. It depends on the moment. Like, you can't, I feel like, to categorize things, I'm very much more interested, like you say, in like watching or listening to something and being like, I like that sound, or that's a curious kind of subplot, or because then I feel like you're actually giving the work its credibility. Suppose we're talking a bit about credibility there. Like, someone is going to listen to your work with enough of their ears because they think you've put enough thought into it, rather than letting it gloss over you or whatever.
How important is it for the listener to kind of understand the amount of work that has gone into creating a piece of music and crafting, an album?
I think, and I obviously can only ever speak for myself, but the thing that I think that I make work for, and that lots maybe people, is that I want to be understood. That's why I make work, is because I go, I want you to understand me. The worst feeling in the world is when it's misinterpreted, and you go, okay, well, I'm just going to have to try and say that again because it wasn't understood. That's the hardest thing that we're doing as people, is saying, do you understand me? And someone's saying back to you, did you say this? And you're saying, no, that's not what I meant. I'll try again. That's my quest, is like, when people, I think, come to see a show, and that you have that feeling in a show, that's like everyone is standing and saying, I understand. And that's what is being missed, I think, so much at the moment.
It's that feeling of everyone, in a room together, connecting and feeling emotions of the kind of same variety, and just like you say, all being there
Definitely.
together.
Yeah, it's the most missed thing, I think, for a lot of people who are into music at the moment. Is And I think the online sphere is dangerous. I think it's full of sadness and isolation, and I think that only having that thing and not having opportunities to connect with human beings, when you're in a really good gig and the mood is amazing, and someone like bangs into you at the bar, and you both turn and you look at each other and you smile, you say, that's fine, mate, like, don't worry. And it's the best feeling in the world, because it's allowing all of you to behave as if you're in a utopia. Like, everyone has space and time for one another. I think that's just, it shows us what we are capable of and what we still have within us.
It feels like the number of examples of places you can think of like that in the modern world as well. That idea of everyone just being completely kind to each other and that utopian thing that you were mentioning. It feels like it's decreasing a wee bit, or quite a bit. The places where that can
Definitely,
be a
I think
thing.
that I really try really hard to, because I don't know. All I know is that I've been part of, during COVID, like been part of small local community groups, and you go, okay, so if I'm aware that there are two happening on my street, then there must be so many more happening across the country, across the world, and people are sort of, I think, taking things into their own hands in that respect. And I think that I truly have to believe that people are finding a way. But I think at the moment, with the main thing being that you can't gather with big groups of people, I'm hoping it doesn't put too much of a dent in our spirit. But with music, I think that it's going to be so exciting. Like my younger cousin, she's 18, she just moved down to London. I said to her the other day, I was like, when this builds back up, it's going to be so exciting. Who knows what economic states we're going to be in, but like maybe there'll be really cheap warehouse space. Maybe there'll be really this, there's going to be a new energy of getting people together. I hope so anyway.
Yeah, and fingers crossed that everyone can kind of tap into that and use that to fuel them.
Yeah, I hope so. I really hope so.
California Screaming kind of touches upon what we've been speaking about a little bit as well, though, with its idea of collective panic almost. It's a lot darker than the first track on the EP, and it's got such an evocative phrase about it. Were you in a state of kind of panic when you wrote it, or stress when you wrote
Not
it?
when I wrote it. I'm certainly the kind of artist who I can't actually write when I'm in the throes of a very kind of uncomfortable emotion, be it sadness or anxiety or stress. I have to wait till after. But we've been in America. I was with Bombay again, and I was suffering with incredibly bad anxiety. So like very physical, like my shoulder, like my body was constantly tense. I was in quite a lot of physical pain. I was having a bit of trouble getting on top of it, and all the news cycle. It was like killer bees, and like I'd given up smoking and taking up vaping, and their whole thing was that like everyone was dying from vaping. So I was like mad stressed and like trying not to take in any more nicotine, which didn't last, but to be fair. But so it was clear that to me it was a really clear sense of. It was the first time I've been to America and felt like America was not very well.
Yeah, it's in quite a. I feel like unhealthy is a kind word for
Yeah.
where it is at the moment.
And like I've got a lot of friends in America, and they're all some of the most intelligent and sort of sensitive and creative people I know. But the country as a whole feels so unbelievably kind of hard to understand at the moment. It's really hard to understand. It's mad that the only thing that unifies British voters is that everyone over here, regardless of whether you're Tory or Labour or whatever, we don't like Trump. That's the only unifying thing we have.
The one silver lining from what he is.
Yeah, exactly. So I think California Screaming was definitely about that sense of just wanting to release that tension and to just break that spiky, uncomfortable spell. That's why there was so much screaming.
Is it a different feeling for you? I mean, that's such like a kind of personal, internal experience that is, although it's happening all over the world, it's just occurring with, it feels like it's just occurring with you in that moment. How does that differ to when you look at, like we were speaking about the last track earlier on the EP, that is dealing with this kind of collective, worldwide sense of everyone being in the same place in the same period of stress? Are they quite different feelings for you? When it's like a one person thing compared to everyone feeling the same thing?
Well, depending on your school of thought, I suppose everyone is experiencing something globally alone. As much as you can acknowledge that somebody else and empathize with somebody else's suffering, everyone's ultimately dealing with this kind of by themselves. And I think that that's sort of where there can be that crossover between the personal and kind of universal. I'm sure there's a sort of more eloquent and academic way to come at that question. But when you listen to a song, usually you think this one is about me. This is my song. But you will know that the person next to you is resonating with them in the same way. So it's both isolating and connecting. I don't know.
It's almost like you're isolated together. It's that weird kind of paradox.
Yeah, I can't really kind of put my finger on what I mean, but I think that when there is a kind of global sense of struggle, you will find comfort in something that speaks to you, not to everyone, I think.
What did you find comfort in at that time then?
I didn't really find anything until I got home. I sort of just endured. I really just endured and just kept it together, and then got home, and then I think I sort of got myself straight a little bit. But and when I say that, it's things like looking after yourself, not drinking, doing yoga, all those things that people know help to de-escalate the situation a little bit. And walking my dog. I'm a real walker. That's where I find a lot of peace.
Do you walk a lot without purpose, like just going out for a walk?
I love it. There's nothing I like more than getting lost. So if I'll, find a path and then just go, and we'll just see where it gets us. And then if we can't find our way back, you find, you find north on the compass, and on your phone. Like, I'm not complete anorak, but I love it. It really gives me a lot of, I find that empowering too.
Does it have any effect on creativity as well?
Well, yeah, I think it probably does. I think that if you're working in the studio, the written work, and then you take that break for an hour or so in the middle of the day and just walk, it gives you that sense of kind of drinking a palate cleanser, or like a glass of water, and then you get back to work refreshed.
With the closing track again, just to come back to it, where we've spoken a lot about the state that everything is in at the moment. Where do you find hope then? If we look at the closing track and that idea of hope or something like it.
I think it's a loosely a James Baldwin quote, but I think that you have to sort of be, he says you have to be hope. So, it's not just like finding it, it's like having to believe that it exists in people, which is quite a curious notion. But when times are really hard, you find it just in the small, those small snippets of good news, or in nature. Nature will do what it does. And I think that a lot of people have felt a lot of comfort in, maybe I heard the Dawn chorus in London for the first time in my whole 12 years that I lived there in lockdown. Stuff like that makes you think, well, we're kind of so cheesy, but we're guests here. We exist amongst many, many, many other beings. And it sort of just takes your ego out of it a little bit. And I think that stuff, if more and more people start to have some connection with the natural world like that, maybe ego will take a back seat and we'll find a way. But we're so resilient. We're just going to keep going. We don't know which way it's going to go. But yeah, I think I don't think you have a choice but to hope, really.
I think that's quite a beautiful, optimistic note to wrap it up on.
Yeah.
But before we do so, there was one more thing I wanted to ask about.
Yeah.
Quite a pressing question that maybe a lot of people have on their mind. How did Grace Jones's limousine almost run you over?
Oh my God. That was, oh my God. So this was at Wireless Festival, like years ago. It would have been years ago. And I remember I saw Jarvis Cocker and I was a bit like impressed. So I was sort of wandering across the road staring at Jarvis Cocker. And then I hear a beep of a horn and look to my right, and there's this massive limousine. And I'm like, oh shit. And bloody Grace Jones is like cruising by. It was the best. I was like, that is amazing. And it's amazing because she had her own Portaloo. And it's like, well, you do what you can to stay a diva, don't you? You do what you can.
If you're almost going to get run over by one person, I feel like Grace Jones is a pretty good...
I wish she'd hit me, I really do. Not in any serious way, just like a broken toe or something.